In this ESM training video, I'd like to take you through the process of preparing third-party scans for 3D printing with 3Shape OrthoAnalyzer. There are 5 main steps to this process. The first step is to create the patient, create a model set and import the files so that we get them into the OrthoAnalyzer database. From that point, using the prepare tool, we define the planes, the occlusal plane and the sagittal plane. Then we move on to the next step, which is to create the virtual base. Step 4 is where we trim the base and do any tidying up of the bases for both the upper and lower arches. And step 5 is where we export the models. So let's start off using OrthoAnalyzer. We go to the patient model set icon and we're going to create a new patient. And the software asks us to insert as much or as little information as we wish. The bare minimum is the patient ID. We can give that a unique, the patient ID can be a unique number, it could be a number associated with the office management software, or it could be simply the patient's name. In this case, I'll just give it a random ID there of AAA, and the first name is ESM, the second name is Digital Solutions. We click on create and a patient is being created within the database. And now if we use our row of icons up at the top, our second one here is new model set. Click on that. The software is asking us to create a new model set. We have 2 buttons here to the side. The default is both buttons are on, indicating that we're going to import an upper and a lower file for the patient. However, if we uncheck one button or the other, that allows us to indicate or specify that we're just going to select one file for the patient. In this case, we do have an upper and a lower arch, so we'll leave both buttons highlighted. The software requires that we define a model set ID. I'll just call this working model. Again, the ID is totally up to yourself what you use, whether it be in relation to some time point, i.e. it's a pre-treatment scan, it's a working model, it's a debond scan, it's a study model scan. It's completely at your discretion what you use. We can put in the operator ID, operator reference, the date the scan was taken, the date the models were created. We could define those dates if we wish, but in this case we'll just keep it simple. So the next step, the software asks us to define or select the upper and lower files. So under maxillary model, we click on browse, and on my desktop I've got a folder here with some sample data in it, and I select the upper arch, and under mandibular we select the lower arch and click load. In this case, they are actually 3Shape scans that I'm importing, but it allows you to say the process will be exactly the same if you were importing a third-party scan. Of course, if it's OrthoAnalyzer and we're receiving a trio scan, well then the process is a lot more simple and straightforward. But for third-party scans, the process is the same. Create a patient, create a model set, and import the files. So at this stage, we're in the main part of OrthoAnalyzer, which we need to come out of, because to move on to step 2, we're going to go back into the database. We're going to use the preparation tool. So we can either search for the patient by any reference, the ID or the name. So there's, when I select ESM, we've got ESM Digital Solutions. This is the patient we just created. I click the little plus sign beside it. It gives me a list of models for that patient, working model, and rather than double click, as we might be tempted to do, we right click. Right click gives us the option to prepare model set, or alternatively, up at the top here we have the option to prepare model set as well, the same icon. So prepare model set, and the software brings us into a new workflow. It's a very predefined workflow, so there's several steps to it. Working from the top toolbar, we've got the option to define the planes, create a virtual base, sculpt the upper arch, and sculpt the lower arch, and the all-important green check mark to indicate that we are finished the process. It's very important that we do use that. So the first stage that the software brings us to is the plane alignment. The software is asking us to set up an occlusal plane here in green writing, and it's asking us to set up the landmark 1/6. So 1/6 being the upper right molar. Using these sliders over here, I can change the visibility of each of the two arches, or I can click on the little black dot here, and that allows me to turn off the lower model. It's really important that we turn off the model rather than just making it invisible. If it's invisible, it's still there. Even if it's nearly totally invisible, it could still be there, and the landmarks we may select, even though we think we're selecting it on the upper arch, may in fact be on the lower arch. So we'll turn off the lower arch. The software is asking us to define the occlusal plane. It's asking us to select a tooth, a point, quadrant 1, tooth number 6. And now it's asking us to select a point between 1, 1 and 2, 1. So another point up here, and again on 2, 6. When I select those 3 points, the software then creates a plane, and as I rotate the model, you can see that that plane has been formed. It's the occlusal plane. And ideally, the software is expecting us to select the highest 3 points around that arch. We don't have to be too precise about it. You can see there we're out a slight bit. That's not a big deal. All we're trying to do is create a basic reference for the software. Once we've selected those 3 points, then the software asks us to set up the sagittal plane. So we select a point around about the midline, click and drag a line through the arch. We don't want it to be biased to one side or the other side of the arch. We want it to run down pretty much through the palatal midline. And when we release the left mouse button, the software has now created the sagittal plane. And these are going to be our frame of reference. It's a frame of reference to identify a standard frontal view, left view, top view, right view, and so on. We'll also serve to act as our planes of reference for the base, so the software knows where the top of the base should be, the bottom of the base, the back of the base, and so on. If we had made a mistake here on any of these planes, we could hit clear sagittal plane, and sagittal plane disappears, and then we just go ahead and draw it in again. Once we're happy with that, we click OK, and we move on to the next step, which is to create the virtual base. So there are 3 stages within this function. The first step is where we define the cut, the second step is fit the base, and the third step is create the base. So defining the cut, what we're going to do is trim around the upper arch and trim around the lower arch so that we can define what part of the arch we want to keep and what part we want to get rid of. You'll notice we have 2 buttons on this side, and those 2 buttons serve exactly the same function as these buttons over here. So how I like to start this is we'll hide or turn off the lower arch, and then starting anywhere, we can just click on points around the arch to define what part of the arch we want to keep and what part we want to get rid of. And don't be distracted by the fact we see some of the green lines coming through from the other side. Ignore them, just keep working away. Select your points, and when we're finished, we click on the first point again. As we hover over the first point, you'll see its color changes to yellow, and when we click on it, then the loop is closed. At this point, if we did want to make any amendments, make any changes, we can click and drag each point around to a more appropriate position. If we want to add a point, we can right click on the line, right click on the line and add point, or we can right click on the point and remove the point if we found we have had to create too many points. So in this case, if we look, we have more points around tight corners. I tended to select some more points, and on straighter spans I tended to select fewer points. The reason there being, we don't want to select too many points, it just means more clicking, and if we do want to make an adjustment, it means more points we need to move. Whereas when I wanted to detail, I wanted finer control around the distal of the molars, I selected more points to give you that detail. Now I turn off the upper arch and I can turn on the lower arch, and at this point I'm ready to start clicking, and I just jump in straight away and start clicking points. If we make a mistake, which very often happens, particularly as you get familiar with the software, if you make a mistake, the best thing to do is forget about it and just move on and come back and make a change. It's not possible to click and drag a point in mid as we're selecting all the points. We can't move a point until we have closed off the loop. So in my attempt to click on that point to move it, I've actually created another point. So again, as I say, let's forget about those additional points and just work our way through and click on the first point again, and you'll see that the software straightens everything out. So we've got a point here, and we can click and drag that point around to where it should be. It's always good to look at a surface straight on in order to get a good perception as to where the surface actually lies, where the point actually lies, and that point will pull it right back there. And of course, if we wanted to, we could have just right clicked on the point and deleted it. If we get to a point or get to a stage where we're not happy with the spline, and that's the name of this green line, it's called a spline, we can clear it. We can hit this button to clear the spline on the upper arch. We can use this button to clear the spline on the lower arch. Just because the upper arch is not showing, if we click on clear splines for upper, it will delete those splines. So just be careful if you are going to use these buttons. Make sure you hit the right one. So I'm going to just do that. I'm going to clear spline just to show one more feature. If we double click a point, sometimes it happens by accident. We can't select any more points, and the reason being is because that point that we double clicked has joined straight back to the start point again by default. Let's do that again. Click, 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 and if I double click on this point, software closes off the loop. So it's important not to double click until, of course, if we wish to use that feature, we can do so at the very end. And double click, and it closes off the loop. That all looks good. At this point, I click on next. Then the software brings in a full upper and lower arch. Sorry, full upper and lower base. You can see the outline of the base in line with a typical orthodontic trimmed base, and it's also orientated in line with the occlusal plane and with the sagittal plane. Now we can change the size of the base if we wish by clicking and dragging the green control points, or we can use the purple control points and we can change the orientation of the base. What's important is to make sure that all of the green splines are contained within the boundary of the base. And usually a top or a bottom view is a good view to use in order to identify that. So we can see that all those splines are kept within the boundary of the base. If they're not, well then we can click and drag the base or change the size of the base in order to make sure that they all are contained. If we wish to change the direction, the size of the base in any one direction, we can use this button over here, this checkbox, scale symmetrically. And we can click and drag, and the size of the base will change depending on the direction in which we click and drag that point. And once everything looks reasonably okay, click on next, and then the software will create a base, keeping the anatomical detail that we've selected, trimming away the excess anatomical detail, and then applying a base, like so. And if at any point we're unhappy, we can go back to the previous step, make an adjustment. I just pull that down a little bit, click on next, and then we'll refit the base based on that. There we go. So we're happy with that base, and we click OK, and that brings us on to the next stage. So when we're taking a scan and preparing it for 3D printing, the first step is, as we've just seen, that we need to create a base. Now we're going to trim the base away, and some may be thinking, why should we do that? Can we not just create a smaller base in the first place? It's very difficult to create a smaller base to the size, accurately to the size that we want to use, and we do need to close the base, close the model off. Initially the model was a shell, it was hollow, and now what we have on screen is a watertight model. It's effectively a solid model. It's closed in all 3 dimensions. And at this point we may decide, well, we've got a set of study models and we like them, we don't want to interfere with them. Well, we could hit the green check mark, and they're done and kept within our database. But in this case we do want to trim them down prior to printing. So the software requires that we work on the upper arch initially, and gives us this option. We're at this stage of the process, Sculpt Maxillary, and we've got our little Sculpt toolkit. So there's 5 main features that we have here. The first one I'm going to work with is the plane cut feature. And what we do is click and drag a line. So I'm starting from the left, I'm going over to the right. And if we imagine that line was an arrow, so it started on the left and we moved towards the right. So imagine a big arrowhead sitting here. What the software has done, it has removed everything. If we look along the line, look along the arrow, the software has removed everything to the left hand side of the arrow. As I spin the model around, you can review what we've done. And we want to make sure that if we are printing this out, perhaps for the purpose of making a retainer, that we have enough material or gingiva on the model. So in this case we might decide, well, we want to lift that plane up slightly, and we can do so by clicking and dragging the blue control point, and we see that we have a little bit more material. We could change the orientation of the plane as well if we want, by clicking and dragging the red control point, or simply by clicking and dragging the edge of the plane. I do encourage you, though, if you are doing any movements like that, that you look at the plane as truly as possible. It's not possible to get a good representation of what we're trying to do if we have the plane at such an angle. We do get a much better representation if we try and make those kind of adjustments, looking at the model either square on from the front or from the side. We can undo any changes that we make. So let's go back to a right side view and make that cut again. That looks good. At this point, we might like to get rid of this excess material around the heels of the arch, and we can do that using the spline cut function. So when I activate the spline cut function, I've got 2 buttons here which allows me to create a straight cut or a curved cut. I'm going to go for the curved cut. And starting with a point off the model, I work my way around and then come over to this side. And I've drawn a line. And what the software will do is extrude that line through the model and just slice through. And again, let's consider the direction. If we say that this was a curved arrow and it started from here and ended here, looking along that arrow, this is to the left hand side, this is to the right hand side, and when I click on the little button to apply the cut, the software removes everything to the left hand side. Now if we made a mistake, if we got it wrong, if we started here and worked our way around, and the software removed everything else, well, we do have a reverse direction button, which will save us in some tricky situations. And reverse again. Now finally, we can use the little spray can icon, which is our wax knife tool. I can add material, I can remove material, and I can smooth material. I'm just going to turn the diameter of this down. I'll use remove. And we can scratch in the initials for the patient. And that will all be printed. Once we're happy with that, we'll do the same on the lower arch. So again, considering the direction of the vector, for the line, for the plane cut, if I go from right to left, and imagine that as being a line, imagine it being an arrow, everything to the left hand side of the arrow will be removed. There we go. If we got it wrong, we could hit swap cut direction. Let's click on that again. There we go. And now we take a top view. And again, we have some material here we might like to get rid of here and here. So just to show you some other uses of this feature, if I clicked on my first point on the model, I highlighted the fact we must click off the model when we trimmed the upper arch. So now I click on the model. As I make my cut, the software is expecting me, and it requires that I close off the line that I produce. So the software is preempting that closing line. So if we ignored that closing line, what's going to happen, and we click apply, what happens is the software gets rid of everything outside of the circle, or well, obviously not a circle, but it's everything on the outside of the cut, and leaves us with that. If I hit reverse direction, that's no good to us either, because we end up just losing everything at the back. So the best thing here is clear. We'll clear that spline and we'll start again. Take a true top view, and again starting off the model. Click our points, and then click apply. If we double clicked on that last point, the software would join it right up to the first point, and again we'd have a closed loop, i.e. just keeping a chunk out of the whole arch. Again, that looks good. One other thing I do want to show you is, let's clear that again. If you need to make a cut in 2 stages, for example, so I just want to make my cut around here, I can apply, makes that first cut, and then if I want to make a secondary cut, I got to click on the spline cut button once more, and then okay, what happened here is I clicked and dragged a small little line. It was a very small line, and the software just decided to keep a tiny bit within that line. So thankfully we have the undo button, and if I go back, I select I'm going to create a new spline cut, and in this case it's a straight cut, a straight line between points, or I can click on the curved line again and it will allow me to create a new cut, a new curved cut. That's exactly what I want. And now we can go to the sculpting tool. Again, on the bottom we'll mark the patient's initials. Click OK, and we can hit the green check mark to say that we're done. The software then brings us back to the database, highlighting the patient, highlighting the set of models, or the model set that we were just working on. And our final step in the whole process is we right click on working model, select export, and export models.